Welcome to Political News and Views with your host, Congressman Ed Towns of Brooklyn, New York, representing the 10th Congressional District, programming with your concerns in mind.
Committee will come to order. Who is watching the backs of the American people to preserve and create jobs?
And now, your host, Congressman Ed Towns.
Welcome to News and Views. Oh, I'm excited today about the fact that we have the former mayor of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Dr. Wilson Goode. And of course, my colleague and longtime friend from actually Chicago, Illinois, who serves with me on the Energy and Commerce Committee is Bobby Rush, Congressman Bobby Rush, who is also Reverend Bobby Rush as well, pastors the church in of course, Chicago. You know, I'm excited about today because you know, we were talking, you know, off camera about the prison system and about young people, you know, being incarcerated and how the number has grown over the years. And of course, you have a program that is dealing with people that who have been to prison and people who you're trying to prevent from going to prison. Tell us a little about that in terms of how you got involved in it as well.
Well, first of all, I run a program called Amachi. Amachi is a Nigerian Igbo word that means who knows but what God has brought us through this child. Amachi is people of faith mentoring children of promise. On any given day in America, there are 10.7 million children with one of both parents either in prison or under some type of federal, state, or local supervision. And what we know is that if nothing happens, 70% of those children would end up in prison themselves. In fact, I went to a prison and saw in that prison a grandfather, a father, and a grandson, all in the same prison at the same time. And what shocked me even more than 3 generations of fathers in prison was the fact they met for the first time in prison. When I was about to leave, the grandson came to me and said to me, "I have a son that I've never seen." And he said, "Dr. Goode, you think I will see him for the first time in prison too?" So it brought to light the fact that in 2011, it is possible to have 3 or 4 generations of family members in prison at the same time, because incarceration, in a very unfortunate manner, has become intergenerational. And so we have to do something in order to begin to deal with that problem. And so working with Dr. Dean Trulier and Dr. Charles Lewis, we decided to do something about this problem. So we have a program called the Healing Community, operated, run by Dr. Harold Dean Trulier, funded by the Annie Casey Foundation. And this program is geared to deal with not the children, but to deal with those who are returning from prison. We call them returning citizens. And it is our belief that if every congregation in America, every church in America, every congregation in America would become a community of interest and take interest in these returning citizens who spent time in prison and find housing for them and help them to reestablish themselves, that we could, in a very significant way, reduce those who return, reduce the recidivism rate in this country in a significant way. Because what we've seen happen in this country in the past 20 years is a almost quadrupling, a 4-fold increase of incarceration in this country. If you go back to 1980, you find there were probably about 500,000 people in prison. In 2011, there are 2.2 million people in prison. That all came about primarily because of the change in the drug laws, the war on drugs, and the sentencing guidelines, and 3 strikes you're out, and new state laws, and et cetera. And the unfortunate part of this is that the overwhelming majority of the people who have now been incarcerated are African American, are Hispanic Americans, that make up a disproportionate number of people in prison than their population suggests. So the key thing here is that what we want to do is, in the first hand, stop young people from going to prison. We do that by finding a loving, caring adult to spend 1 hour once a week or 2 hours twice a month for at least 1 year to redirect their lives. We've done this now for 11 years, and we've served more than 300,000 children in this country. And what we've found out is that 2/3 of those children improved their grades, 2/3 improved their behavior, 2/3 improved their attendance at school, and 90% of those children will end up having a better relationship with their peers, with their family members. Overall, we will have a more positive outcome for those children. On the other end, for those who've been to prison now coming out, we want to keep them from going back in. 15 years ago, 1 in 4 went back to prison. In 2011, 3 out of 4 within 5 years will go back to prison themselves. And that's because when they come out, they cannot find jobs. They find a community that is very suspicious of them. They cannot find housing. They cannot find any way of living productively. So they go back to a life of crime. We believe that if the faith community come together and begin to work to give support to those in the communities where those congregations are, that we could alter that 3 out of 4 going back to prison to at least 1 out of 4 going back over the next 10 years. And so we're working very, very hard to try and change that at the front end and at the back end of the prison system.
Right, I noticed that you have a book here, Ministry with Prisoners and Families, and of course by you, Dr. Good, and of course Charles Lewis and Harold Dean Trulier. And I know that my good friend here, he's read the book and he has been talking to me about it, and he's excited. Yeah. So and also he's been involved in terms of trying to change lives in terms of young people. So Congressman, let me just sort of turn over to you, because he indicated he couldn't put the book down.
I really couldn't. Thank you for the gift of the book. I came into my office, I opened the package up, and there it was, and I looked at it, and I started reading the foreword to the book. And I wasn't able to put it down. I had to keep reading it. And I certainly want to congratulate Dr. Good for his endeavors, for all his work that he's done, and for this book. I think this book, if you read this book, the fire that's on the inside just ignites if you care really about people. And there's a charge that's put forward in this book. And as he's indicated, the churches, if this problem is going to get solved, it's going to get solved because of the active involvement of the churches. I mean, the gospel of Jesus is going to come alive in terms of what we do for the least of these, and certainly what we do in terms of freeing those who are in prison. And so the churches have to get involved. I mean, the churches can get involved in a number of different ways, but the one thing that we have in our communities, the last bastion, the last institution that we really have any kind of control over, that we own, that we can call ours, is the churches. And so if we're going to turn this problem around, and it's a vast problem, is going to be the churches. And when I read it as an activist, as an organizer, my mind just, and my actions, my activities, just really began to be focused on trying to help solve the problem. We, at my church, we have our men's ministry, and we are now discussing how we're going to implement a program that we call BTC 365.
What's BTC? What's that?
BTC 365, breaking the cycle.
Okay.
365 days a year.
Yeah, right.
Coming out of the book, the ideas behind the book. We have to get involved. We have to get involved with these youngsters, these young family members. We have to get involved with some of the females. The females, according to what I've learned from the book, the black female population is the fastest growing population of prisoners, the black females. And
that's not good news.
It's not good news in a number of different ways. Number one, it's not good news because, again, there are numbers are being added in addition to the black male, but also the black females are the primary caregivers. So when the female is in prison, the trauma that the child feels, the shame that the child feels, the disconnect that the child feels is even greater when the mother goes to prison. So this is this is not by accident, the fact that we are that the prison industrial complex is such a key component of the American economy. It's not by accident. This is calculated because in small town America, prisons are the livelihood. Prisons are the job producing entity, the economic engine for most of those small towns in small town America where these prisons are. So I absolutely agree with Dr. Good. I think now is the time for us to really make this one of the top issues, if not the top issue that we have to be confronted with.
Yeah, and the key thing is when you really look at the fact that there is a particular group of people who are uneducated or undereducated, who are unemployed, and who end up in this system and end up having laws and policy directed towards them, that you have to conclude that it is very similar to slavery, especially when you look at the fact that private corporations are beginning to own and manage prisons, and they sell stock on Wall Street. And the stock markets, and people invest in these companies so to get a return profit. So there's no incentive for those who are part of the prison industrial complex to dismantle the system. That will only come about when people in Congress and people in state houses and state Senate and U.S. Senate begin to look at this problem and say we have to do something about it. 83% of those who are in prison would not be in prison if we roll the laws back to pre-war on drugs. Pre-1980, they would not be in prison. And even more devastating to me is the fact that when they come out of prison, they continue to serve a sentence. And I call it a lifetime sentence because they cannot get jobs. They cannot get food stamp in some places. They cannot live in public housing in some places. And they are simply shunned by the people that once knew them. So it becomes, as Michelle Alexander says in her book, A New Jim Crow, that these are people who cannot have the same rules applied to them and applied to the rest of us in society, and that they are a part of a caste system in America in 2011. And it's up to some of us to speak out about that, to sound alarm about the slavery aspect of it, about the Jim Crow aspect of it, to begin to dismantle this prison industrial complex that is keeping so many African American boys, especially, and increasingly, as the congressman has said, increasingly African American women and mothers. And so it's a devastating hit against the African American community and the Hispanic community in 2011.
Right. You know, we have a lot of clergy folks who watch this show. You know, what are some of the things that the church should do? Do you have any suggestions or recommendations of some of the activities they could be involved in as a church?
Well, many churches will go to the prison. They will sing, they will pray, they will preach, they will do Bible study, and it ends there. When the prisoners come out, when they return from prison and come to their churches, they close the doors on them. What they need to do is open up their doors and say, we welcome you back. There's a wonderful story in the Bible of Peter, who was in jail, and they went to this house to pray for him. Peter got out of jail. You all know the story.
Oh, yeah.
Came and knocked on the door. They opened the shutter, closed it back, and that's what happens.
Yeah.
And what should happen is what happened with Paul and Silas.
Yeah.
And that was that when they were released from jail, the jailer took them home, and the jailer was blessed, and all the jailer's family, and Paul and Silas were blessed because of what was done with them. And that's what we need to do. We need to wrap our arms around those who are returning from prison. The healing community is a community that takes care of those who are most vulnerable in our society. And those who are in prison and coming out of prison are, in fact, the most vulnerable in our society.
And I just want to see to me, going into the prisons and teaching Bible study and singing and preaching, you know, that is a small kind of sacrifice. Well, the gospel, Jesus, wants us to give all. He said, the Bible says, love your neighbor as yourself. So we have to have a deeper sense of sacrifice and a deeper sense of love. So when these prisoners come out, we have to love them like we love ourselves. Okay, that means that whatever their need is, we got to meet them at their point of need. Now, so that means that a church has to adopt. While they're going to visit the prisoners, that's okay. But then you have a responsibility to not only sing to the person who is in prison, but also sing or take notice or care for those who are not locked behind the bars, but those who are locked outside the bars, the families back at home. You have an obligation to make sure that the child, all right, is cared for, and that the child is given lives in a loving environment that will promote education, that will give that child some of the material needs that they need. Make sure that that child is you check up on them in school, and make sure that they're in school, and make sure that they are doing the work. You got to create a healing, and loving environment for the families of the prison. That's what the churches could and should be doing, while they're also trying to help those who are incarcerated.
But how do you deal with the blame game? This is a big thing in our community where people just blame each other. The Board of Education, of course, they blame. everybody's involved in terms of blaming. How do we get the education system involved in what you're doing and to sort of eliminate all this blame stuff? And also making it possible for people to be honest and be transparent, because if you have a principal that's in charge of a school, in most cases, if something negative happens in the school, they'll do almost anything and everything to try and make certain that it doesn't get out. Because if it gets out that something negative occurred, that makes them a bad principal, a bad teacher, bad administrator. And of course, we need to somewhere or another bring about honesty and integrity and to be able to get the kind of support that you need in the education system.
Well, I've lived my life in a way that I do not believe in blaming anyone. That if there's a job to be done, then there's something I ought to do about it. If I'm not doing everything I can do, then I have no right to blame anyone else for what they're doing. And if I'm just simply a kind of spectator criticizing, then I'm as much of the problem as the person that they're criticizing, in my view. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we just have to focus in on what matters in our society, it seems to me. Education is a foundational piece in all of this. If children can read at grade level by the third grade, by the third and fourth grade, they will undoubtedly graduate high school, go on to college. If it cannot read at grade level by the third and fourth grade, many of them will end up becoming a prison statistics. So we know where we need to place our energies. Give them a good, solid education. They can go on and take care of themselves. The failure, the breakdown is in our educational system. In the first, the second thing is that we need adult, especially African American men and Hispanic men, especially, to become mentors to our young African American boys and African American and Hispanic boys. We need them out there engaged in this process, because if we're not engaged in this process, it's not going to happen. And then the third thing I would simply say, that every pastor, every clergy person, every person watching this program ought to read two books. One is Michelle Alexander's book on the new Jim Crow, because that tells you the kind of legal mess we're in terms of prison. And then the book that we put out, The Way Forward, by myself and Dr. Trulier and Charles Lewis, that says here's what you can do. Here are a dozen or 15 different things you can do to help solve this problem.
Right. Let me ask this. Go ahead. You want to comment on
that? I have to say that those two books go hand in hand. It's like Michelle's book, The New Jim Crow, laid the problem out. And Dr. Good and Brother Lewis's book, it says, okay, here's how you solve the problem. I mean, you can't read one without the other, and they complement each other so well, all right? You can't help but be on fire, particularly if you have the love of the Lord in your heart. I mean, because, this book, again, any authentic church has to be involved in this problem, in the black community, has to be involved in this problem of solving this tremendous problem that exists. And this nation has more people in prison than China, than Iran, than any other country. We have more people in prison than any other country.
More people in prison in the aggregate than the 36 countries of Europe combined, who have 1.7 million with 900 million population, and we have 300 million population and 2.1 million people in prison.
So, and it's not by accident. This is a calculated way, as Michelle argues, This is a calculated way to control a people, to control and exploit a people, just like it was during slavery.
Wow, wow. Let me ask you this. You know, the Census Bureau is trying to make a change in terms of, you know, how they count people, and that instead of counting them in the prison, they would count them back in the communities that they come from. You think that's going to make a difference in any way?
Make a difference
in terms of resources, because as you know, that resources are attached with those numbers. And if they're counting them in the prison, that means that a town or that area gets additional resources based on them being in prison.
I believe that people should be counted at the location where they were arrested from and where they came from, not in the area where they're residing while they're in prison. And I believe that will make a huge difference in the attitude of whether or not those prisons are located in those places or not.
Right.
Make a huge difference.
Well, let me first thank you, Dr. Good, for the work that you're doing, you and Dr. Lewis, and of course Dr. Trulier. And I want to thank you, Congressman, because of your outreach in Illinois. Because through the church, and I do believe that the only way that we're going to get a handle on this is that the faith community has to be involved. And if the faith community is not involved, I can see us coming back here year in and year out talking about the fact that the numbers are going up and up and up. So I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, and I want to thank you for coming and being on News and Views. You can be assured that you can count me in every way, because I do believe that the faith community is the community that needs to really be involved. And I think your book talks about proper ministry in terms of how you deal with it. Yeah. So I think that's important too, because, you know, just going to the prison and singing and of course coming back out and then not having the relationship when they come out, I think you're right. So thanks again for being on News and Views. Pleasure. Thank you so much for what work you're doing.
I just, in summation, if we got a chance, the scripture tells us, judge not and be not judged. So we can't judge the prisons if we don't want to be judged at the same time.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being on News and Views.